I am Pupul Bisht. I am the Director of Foresight and Design at Horizon 2045. We're in the business of reimagining the future of human and planetary security. And we're doing that by bringing together decision makers from across different issue spaces. So nuclear, climate, AI, public health. What happens when you put leaders from all these seemingly disparate spaces, but we know they're actually very entangled, together in the same room, what new insights emerge. I also run Decolonizing Futures Initiative, which utilizes an Indian folk storytelling tradition-inspired technique for engaging historically marginalized cultural perspectives and knowledge systems in the conversation about our broader planetary futures. So that's me. And we're going to be talking about the future of storytelling today on this panel. And in a world that's really faced with interconnected challenges, storytelling is no longer, or actually some would argue, was never just about entertainment, but it does have, enjoy that perception. It is really about power, right? Technology is also changing how we create stories, how we share them, from AI to virtual worlds to immersive experiences and beyond. And I think the question that we really need to grapple with is not just about new tools, it's about whose hands are going to have access to those tools and what are they going to do with that access? How are they going to shape those narratives? And to what extent are those narratives going to shape what our future looks like? So I'm hoping that we get to play with this duality a little bit, both about the future of storytelling itself, but also what kind of responsibility do we have in storytelling our collective futures. So we have an extraordinary panel with us today, Professor Lonny Brooks from AfroRhythm's Futures Group, Glenn Gaynor from Amazon, and Omar Butti from Dubai Film and TV Commission. Thank you for joining us. And there is so much to say about all of you and your extensive experience and expertise. And I'm a firm believer that it's best to hear people's stories in their own words. So I'm actually going to pass it on to all of you. And maybe if you can take just 2 minutes to introduce yourselves. In particular, tell us how you define storytelling in the context of your own practices, and also how your approach to it has evolved over the course of your career. So I'll start with you, Lonny, since you're right next to me. Take it away.
Let's see if this works. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. All right, great. Yes, so I'm a co-founder of the AfroRithm Futures Group with Ahmed Best, who's sitting right over there. Yay. And so the way I'm a professor of communication and chair of the Department of Communication at Cal State East Bay. I'm an affiliate researcher with the Institute for the Future, work with the Stanford's School of Design. But, how I came to this too was studying the Institute for the Future as a doctoral student. I was like, gosh, people make stories about the future and they get paid to do so? Wow. But when I was there, I remember quite specifically how kind of Eurocentric it felt that my stories weren't represented there too. I mean, I grew up in a fantastic era of the 1970s with fantastic storytelling science fiction tropes, but maybe the closest I got to it was Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. And I didn't see myself, even being partially blind, I didn't see people until like Lieutenant Forge in Star Trek The Next Generation with his visor augmenting his sight. But, so that really made me think about what does it mean to center the Black, indigenous, Black diasporans in the future. Like Aisha Wormsley's billboard that says there are Black people in the future. And so I got inspired by storytelling games like Stuart Candy's Think from the Future, but I wanted to hack it up and reinvent it with a cultural accent. A lot of our games about the future can be very generic, without the cultural accents of 8 billion people on the planet. So how do we inflect that too? And then forming the AfroRithm Futures Group, we also came up with this idea of creating what we call the Astro-Egalitarian Virtual Nation. How do we create a safe space for Black diasporans and indigenous peoples in the future? and how do we rediscover our undiscovered stories. So W.E.B. Du Bois was not only a sociologist in the 19th century and 20th century too, he was a science fiction writer in the early 1900s. And he created a fictional instrument called the megascope to look for the undiscovered stories. And so there's that recovery of our undiscovered stories and what we term ancestral intelligence that combines the emotional engine of what moves us with the erasure and recovery of our tales, of our visions of the future that were erased during colonialism, right? So it's the recovery of, when you think about, and I'm just gonna tell this real quick story, too, of, it's like a science fiction horror story when you think about the Middle Passage of millions and millions of Africans being kidnapped from West Africa and brought across a vast interstellar sea to the Americas where they could be killed for practicing their religion, speaking their language, eating their own food, playing their own music. What do they do in the face of erasure? They reinvent themselves. They create what's called sonic utopias, spirituals with the imposition of Christianity, recreate these hymnals into spirituals that envision the future of not being slaves, and then become coded messages for escaping slavery at the same time. Haha, this is something that we actually need right now for the next 4 years. So you get that implication. So that's what ancestral intelligence is about, is recovering those undiscovered stories and amplifying them in the future. And so I think that's what we need. And so when we think about the cone, the traditional cone of futures thinking, the cone of possibility, we kind of forget that ancestral intelligence gets erased, and that's actually what can shape and harvest and grow and reinvent our imaginations, because we have suffered from the failure of our imagination, and we need to recover our imaginations as people. All right, I said enough.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Amazing.
Thank you.
We had a discussion last night, and I couldn't sleep after talking to Lonny. I was so ramped up. So, hi guys, I'm Glenn Gaynor, and I'm head of physical production at Amazon MGM. I was previously head of production for Sony Pictures Screen Gems and a producer for the company. I co-created a studio for Sony called Sony Innovation Studios, which is still in operation. And I started my film career as a movie producer sometime in the 20th century, if we can remember that far back. And when I was making films, I think Mel Brooks said it best: the hardest thing about making a film was putting all those holes in the side. There's like 1 million of them, And we had sprockets and all these things. It was very mechanical. And I produced pictures, very interesting independent movies. The first film I did was Happy Texas. Not the first, but one of the first films I did as a producer. A movie called Happy Texas. We shot for like 1.7 million, and we sold it at Sundance for about 10 million. And I worked on the craft for about 10 years before joining Sony Pictures. And I was sort of brought into the studio system. But what was exciting for me when I joined Sony, and why I wanted to join Screen Gems specifically, is because I had this realization even then that Hollywood can do two things. It can unfortunately reinforce stereotypes, or it can inspire change. And it's the latter of the two that is my ambition and has been my ambition. And what we were doing at Screen Gems at that time, we were telling stories with women in power. We were making pictures like Resident Evil and Underworld, absolute popcorn movies, absolutely popcorn. But the leads were women, and that wasn't done a lot back then. And we also helped launch careers. We helped with Kevin Hart's career, very talented at that time. We just recognized that talent and put him in the film, a film called Think Like a Man. And I remember when our studio boss bought the book, he was in Las Vegas and he had the book, and somebody said, "Oh my God, I read that book." He said, "Yeah, I just bought this book for $1 million. You said, "You overpaid. I bought mine for $13.95. But we recognized that was a very important book, and it was worth it, and we made that film, Think Like a Man, and it went on to gross about $90 million in the United States. And it was really sort of that first crossover picture. And that's very important because, seeing ourselves represented in cinema, seeing ourselves represented in pop culture is critical for all of us. And we still have a lot of work to do with that. And that's why I have this image behind me. When I think of the Museum of the Future and what it represents, it's representing culture from around the world, species from around the world. And I see these and I say, that's at least 40,000 stories we haven't heard. And that's where I see cinema going. We're starting to see the empowerment of local stories, of local cultures. Years ago, making a picture here in the United Arab Emirates, I brought Hollywood here, and we were shooting in the desert. It was a big production, and we had a young woman being interviewed, an Emirati woman, and they asked her a very simple question. You got Hollywood here. What do you think? What do you want to do? And she said, I wish I could be a director, because everybody knows the American teenager, but nobody knows me. And again, we got to think about that. What can we do, and what will the future be for these emerging voices? Hollywood is changing. Hollywood, for years, whether intended to or not, gave us a sort of monolithic version of the world. And it started to break down in the 70s, started to become a little more diverse as we entered the 21st century. And now, with the advent of new platforms, we're actually seeing content on a global basis. Narcos was one of the first television series that allowed people in LATAM to speak in Spanish for the world, and all of a sudden people said, I like that. They didn't mind reading subtitles. They loved the authenticity of that. And then Squid Games came out, and got content from Korea, and people are watching this and they're amazed. So we're seeing stories travel. So really, I'd like to put it out there to the world that we're going to see more localized stories on a globalized basis, because we can be cross-cultural. There's so much commonality we all have. And as storytellers, we're going to continue to find that.
Hard act to follow. Hi, I'm Omar Butti. I'm the Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Dubai Film and TV Commission. Just a little bit about the commission, and I'll talk about myself. Basically, we are the entity, the government entity in charge of facilitating and supporting any production that happens in the Emirate of Dubai. So whether it's a commercial, a feature film, reality series, we connect with them, we help facilitate the locations, permits, content as well. And that's something that, as speaking for myself, I used to be a producer. I still sometimes produce on occasion when I have the opportunity, but it's more of a hobby than a vocation currently. But as a producer, and as Glenn was speaking about, and Lonny was speaking about, it's certainly been a passion of mine and a desire to see more stories that are reflective of the world and the experience that I had growing up here in the Middle East, and certainly in the UAE. And I think one of the most special things about Dubai that excites me and about the UAE is, I've heard this stat, I'm sure, tons of times, the 200 nationalities. But I do think it's really important, because often I think when we think about the type of storytelling that we used to prioritize, we were talking about storytelling is very specific or very broad. So either it was, we want to make something like Hollywood, we want to make something big budget, and that's the only thing that we gave cachet or importance to. Or it was very specific. We're going to tell specifically Emirati, as in UAE national stories. And that's important, and certainly it's something that we advocate for. But we have such an incredible opportunity to use this country as a platform to tell stories that represent the entire world, because the entire world lives here. And to have a really unique, special identity that I think Dubai really has, where you have all these people with different religions and backgrounds and ethnicities and ideologies who live together in harmony and speak different languages at home and outside, but interact and engage in a way I find to be very special and very unique and very different from many other places in the world that I've been and lived. And I think one thing we want to do, and certainly I want to do as a storyteller and supporting storytellers, is to find ways to really create that unique identity, because I don't think we've quite nailed it yet. I think that we've done a lot of the specific things, or we've done the very broad things, but to find that very unique voice, which is very representative of Dubai, of all the nationalities, the different languages, having a show or a series or a reality program where everyone's just speaking different languages and yet somehow interacting and engaging with one another, is a vision that I think is really important for our global future, one that I am very passionate about and like to see more of. So in terms of what we do, we are looking for those types of projects. We'd like to support more of those projects. We still, of course, want the big Hollywood projects. So, Glenn, please come. But also, we want to find ways to support and nurture and advocate for people who have their own specialized, unique, UAE-based, but maybe culturally, globally focused stories to share. But yes, that's a little bit about me and what we do.
Thank you.
So this is working, right? In foresight work, we often start with scanning the horizon, and we look for both strong and weak signals of change. Strong changes, very clear, measurable, already having an impact, and we cannot take our eye off those balls. And then weak signals, those little murmurs, very subtle signs of changes that are emerging that most of us are not really paying close attention to, but if they were to mature, they would have pretty significant disruptive impact on our fields. So given what you all do and the benefit of perspective that you have, that a lot of us in the room don't have on where the future of storytelling is headed, I kind of want to ask all of you specifically to share one strong signal and one weak signal that you think is going to really be significant in thinking about the future of storytelling. And Lonny, I'll actually begin with you. And I want to ask you specifically about signals that are indicating shifts in how you're seeing communities claim and share their narratives.
Yeah, well, I think in gaming is a really maybe a strong and weak signal of change. Because when we think about creating a storytelling system and combining it with AI, us and several of our colleagues are really interested in creating the vernacular of the Black imagination and infusing AI with ancestral intelligence. So when we think about that, we can talk about mothership AI. What does that look like? And mothership is a potent symbol in African and Black diasporan culture, where it becomes the abode. If you remember the Black Panther film, the mothership in Parliament Funkadelic is that mothership of ancestors that embodies ancestral intelligence. And so, to that end, we have several colleagues of ours, like Sarah King, who's created a mind map that reflects your emotional states of being. And she's trying to create and translate it into a visualization technology that's empowered by AI. So it becomes a healing AI. We have another colleague named Philip Butler, who's translated 200 years of Black stories into creating a therapeutic AI that can speak the vernacular of the Black imagination to people in need of it. The idea is to heal intergenerational trauma. And this is what I think is a really strong and weak signal at the same time, to recognize that. Even thinking about games like Coyote and Crow, which is an indigenous game about, well, what if North America hadn't been colonized? What would have happened to Native American civilization, and how would it have developed and grown and become kind of science fiction-y? We also talk about, how did we get to Star Trek, the Federation, but through a lens of the Black imagination and Afrofuturism, and what are the bumps and bruises along the way that we need to tell as stories to get there? And so I think that's really exciting. And so that's why I think of both a weak and strong signal. Well, we know AI is coming, but the weak part of it is that we need to have inclusive AI that's infused with ancestral intelligence.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Glenn, I'll go to you next. Given Amazon's global reach, particularly interested in hearing about strong and weak signals about how patterns in how audiences are interacting with stories are changing. Specifically, given how long you've been in the industry, what is surprising to you?
Yeah, and I'll broaden it out. It could be Amazon, it could be Netflix, it could be Apple. I mean, there are these distributors. But then let's talk about distribution for a moment before we talk about the modernity of the system, because I think that's also important. The Hollywood system, which was invented in the 1920s and 1930s, never got interrupted. While Europe went to war, Hollywood was making its motion pictures. And that's partly why it became one of the strongest voices on a global basis, is that those factories were making content and making what they used to call motion pictures. In the 40s, 50s, they went to film noir, little, lower budgeted pictures. But those films were distributed with film canisters until they deadheaded, that's what it was called, in old Bombay, in India, Mumbai today. And that meant that film traveled the globe. And by the way, if you want to get amazing posters, go to Mumbai, go to Thieves Market, and they actually have posters. And he said, yeah, everything deadheaded here. The poster, everything. And I actually bought an old poster in Mumbai that deadheaded in there. But it showed you that these films traveled the world. And everybody got that, again, that sort of monolithic version of what a motion picture should be. And then we had the internet, and the internet started to open things up, different forms of content, and we can talk about TikTok, and we can talk about Instagram. By the way, TikTok is the #1 watched platform, which is not movies, right? So we know how much things have changed today. But getting into the streaming side, streaming also opened up a lot of opportunities because of local original language content, which a lot of countries also legislated and said, listen, if you want to be in our country, you're going to have to make X amount of percentage of content in our country. That's a great legislation that really emboldened and empowered content. And then, as I said, we started watching films from around the world, TV shows from around the world. But still, they are gatekeepers. Yeah. And any system's going to have gatekeepers. Even the New York Times has gatekeepers, right? Any of these traditional organizations eventually have somebody that says, I don't want that story, put that story over here. And so now we've got to look at that as a weak sign because it's still a challenge. And so what will emerge is going to be new platforms, new ways to share this media. But again, the content has to rise. You can't push content on people. People have to pull the content in. So no matter what platform we're talking about or how it's being distributed, it's still the burden of great storytelling is on that individual, that director. And so, I continue to be excited about where we're going, and we talked about this last night as well. There are countries like Italy. Last year, Captain Io was its nominated movie, and it was a story of 2 African boys traveling the African continent, immigrating to Italy. And so we're seeing even countries submitting their best picture, not in a stereotypical cultural manner, but saying there are other stories in our countries. Yeah. So again, it's up to us to be that change. As Gandhi said, be the change you envision. We can empower it, and then we've got to find ways to get it seen. Film festivals are still a great way to get films seen. Forums like this are the fabric of storytelling. Yeah. So, there's a multiple way of achieving it, and I think we've got to amplify these moments.
Talking about amplifying local stories with global reach, Omar, from your point of view, what are some subtle changes that you're seeing in how regional storytelling landscape is changing here, but also how that is interacting with the broader shifts on a global scale?
Sure. So one thing I want to pick up on what Glenn said, which was, I think, exactly right, is you can't push content on people. Mm-hmm. I think that's been a consistent problem that we've had here in the region. If you live here, if you've been here, then it's no secret that sort of traditional Arab media is not the most watched, the most popular. A lot of it's state-run, including ours here, and they certainly changed and improved and gotten a lot more entertaining and tried to engage more with the audiences. But for a lot of time, they were a monolithic entity, right? They were like Hollywood you described. There were no alternatives, and so with no competition, that was just sort of what you had to do. And in fact, in many cases, and speaking for myself even, it pushed me to engage more with media that was outside this region, because I actually found that I engaged more or identified more with stuff that was Western or European. Now, I think that's changed in a very large, significant way because of things you talked about, whether it's TikTok, social media, the individualization of content creation, and the fact that if you talk to young Arabs here, in fact, just any young person, they'll probably list about 5 or 10, social media personalities before they list any show that they, like in terms of like their favorite things. And that's been really an important, I think, sea change here for the region, that we now have these much more authentic, specific stories being told. People engage in a very personal level. I think people are much more interested in stories that feel both directly relatable and feel very specific to them as an individual. They're looking for other individuals that either confirm or support their view of themselves, of how they see the world, rather than sort of these big, sweeping doctrines as to what you should be as a nation, as a people. And part of our job is to find ways to find those people, support them, and hopefully give them platforms to tell more interesting, more complex, more engaging stories. So that's certainly something that we look at, we try to track, something that's changed. The other thing, of course, that sort of supports that is we're a bit lagging behind the rest of the world, but fewer and fewer people are going to the movie theaters. Fewer and fewer people are watching traditional sort of linear television, certainly, but even series than they have ever before. And we were a bit behind because we have a really strong mall culture. And the theaters are in the malls, and that's just sort of typically what you do, particularly half the year when it's too hot to go outside. You go to the mall, you walk around, you're like, oh, I'm going to have dinner, I'm going to watch a movie. And so we've kind of held on, and retail as well, by the way, much stronger here than many other countries because of that culture. But it is changing, it's shifting. It's something where my kids, they like going to the films because I drag them, but it's not something that they're, dying to go to every single time. They'd be happy to watch it at home. So, we are seeing, again, much more of the shift towards the individual content creator as the most important portal into the culture of the region. But beyond that, and just speaking for ourselves, we're getting more and more international production from different countries, which we're really pleased to see. And I think also reflects, again, the diversity of the people here and the fact that it now makes sense. For example, we have Russian films coming to film here, Chinese films that come to film here. Yeah. I mean, India has been, honestly, probably our best performing or sort of most consistent sort of return customer, if you will, just because of the population and their association with Dubai. But I think you're starting to see that in other markets because people both know the city and they have people living here now and having an experience here and a unique experience that is, for the Chinese, Russian, Indonesian, community here in the UAE. And that's been really special to see. And what I'd love to do is, yes, the big production coming from abroad is great, and we want to support that. But again, having those local communities really telling their own story and being the driving force behind the production in the future is where we'd like to see it go.
That's incredible. I want to build on that point, which was, really touching on the way in which technology has dramatically changed the sheer, scale of reach of audience that no other generation of storytellers had previously. I think it's incomparable. But as people who are sort of leading the innovation in your different capacities, how do you think about the balance between, innovation and responsible use? What kind of guardrails do we need? And I actually want to go to you first, Omar, in thinking about that, because you're someone who's overseeing, in your current role, content development at the policy level. And that's a perspective we don't get to hear about very often. So what principles do you think should guide this era where anybody and everybody is a storyteller with an audience?
That's an excellent question that I wish I had a better answer to. No. It's a constant discussion, to be honest. It's something which is changing all the time. Sort of first and foremost, we kind of look at, principles and rules that we believe help to keep the country sort of respectful and harmonious. So that's first of all, here we have regulations around you don't film people without their permission, you don't speak ill of people in public without their express consent, and we apply that to the type of things that we think should be content-driven. So, of course, we can have fantasy and narrative and conflict. These are all natural parts of storytelling, but we do try to keep it generally things that are respectful. Now, the challenge, of course, is when you have individuals, and a platform, it's very easy to go on and say whatever you want on. That's not something you can control. So it's more a matter of trying to find the people that you think are representing and expressing their various communities or the country in a very positive way, highlighting them, supporting them, finding ways to amplify their voices and improve their sort of opportunities. But then there's also other things that we are constantly discussing, whether it comes to use of AI. I mean, the UAE is very bullish on AI. We have an AI minister. It's something we're always excited about every future thing. We will try everything. If it doesn't work, we'll drop it, and then we'll try the next thing. But that's sort of our approach, which is good. We're not afraid to fail. But yes, there's still an ongoing conversation about AI. Should we be using that in creative space? Is that something that is morally, ethically correct? You're taking other people's work when you're doing it. That's something we haven't come to a firm decision on, but something that we do think about. And also the idea of truth, right? And the issue with deepfakes. These are things that we have to discuss. We do have bodies that monitor, that do their best to keep this stuff from being disseminated or created. Again, that's sort of a losing battle. You're always working, you're always trying. But a lot of it is just really trying to support, engage, and find those positive stories that we think better represent what life is like here, what the experience is for people here. Or even if it is something where it's someone talking about the challenges, that's fine, but it's done in a respectful fashion. And then making sure those people are noticed and heard and supported.
That's excellent. Talking about moral and creative dilemmas, Glenn, I'm going to come to you. So on my flight over to Dubai, I watched a really interesting movie. Show of hands, has anyone seen the movie called The Last Movie Ever Made? Oh. Okay, I highly recommend it. It raises a really poignant question. So it's set in the future, and the world is about to end. And a group of aspiring filmmakers are now faced with the conundrum of, we have very little time, so what's the story that we absolutely must tell before the world comes to an end? So obviously, hopefully our situation is not as dramatic as that, but I imagine, Glenn, people in your position are often making that decision, right? With your resources, with our time, and in this particular moment in our collective history, how do you prioritize and decide which narratives really deserve our time, attention, and resources? And looking beyond traditional numbers around engagement and viewership, what other metrics do you think should shape our understanding of what is successful when we think about the legacy of storytelling?
That is probably the greatest question anybody's ever asked me. And the answer is very layered, because if I narrow it down to the so-called Hollywood system, each studio is going to have a different answer. Each studio has a different priority. And it's one of the biggest challenges that filmmakers and storytellers have, is they say, can I pitch this to, and then fill in the studio. And they say, it's a great story, and it's about whatever it is. Sometimes, no matter how great the story is, it doesn't matter if that studio is not making that kind of film.
Yeah.
Because that studio, whatever it might be, and we know the top 6 to top 7 studios, they each have a mandate. It could be based on brand. There's a studio that has 2 big ears for its logo. Their priorities are going to be different than the studio that has the big mountain. It's right. I know all the people who run these studios. I'm being very generic.
You're trying.
Exactly, I'm trying. So you have to look at it. I actually have heard from a lot of leaders in the Hollywood studio business, and I'll quote even Amy Pascal. She used to run Sony Pictures, and she said one of the great things about the legacy studio she used to work for, called Columbia Pictures, was that it's been around for 100 years, and she said it has survived. There are very few companies in America that have survived over 100 years. General Motors, Ford, Columbia Pictures, Paramount, it's interesting, Warner Brothers. They survive because they adapt, and they're always adapting to taste. MGM got into a lot of trouble in the old days making Ben-Hur. No, sorry. Yes. Making sure that Cleopatra was 20th Century Fox. But these old legacy studios got out of step and were making pictures that weren't resonating, and they went to the brink of collapse. So they had to change. And we're at a critical change at the moment. But it's often that studios don't make what they want to make, they make what they feel they must make. But I can tell you also, being on the inside of studios, we have amazing leaders, and a lot of them are very strong women who have been running these companies for a long time, and they say, I know I've got this demographic. We have this demographic. You know, and you got to make the male-driven star picture. But we need to amplify, we need to uplift another demographic. And so we go out and we actually are making films to try to get that new audience.
Yeah.
Because if you're making something again and again and again the same way, you're leaving a lot of business on the table. And so they're motivated financially to be diverse. They're motivated ethically to be diverse. And all these studios, they are trying it, but they do have their brands. And that's where the independent market comes in. Because the independent market says, well, I have no brand, I can make what I want to make, then sell it at the market, sell it at the film festival, and so forth and so on. And that's where you get films that are made for $2 or $3 million that gross 100, and sometimes even win Academy Awards.
Yeah.
Because it's different, because it's not made by committee or chosen by committee. But I will say the amazing thing about Hollywood today is that in the old days of Hollywood, 80% of the pictures the studios put out were developed inside the studio. Today, that's dropped down to 10%.
Wow.
90% of the films come into the studios are developed by independent producers, by writers and directors. The studios are not developing the way they used to. And so that is a phenomenal change. But they still have to say, okay, well, what can we make? You know, again, if you have a certain platform, you may not be able to release horror films on your platform. So again, it's just kind of knowing that marketplace.
Thank you for sharing that. That was incredibly insightful. And Lonny, now I'll come to you with a similar question. We're talking about ethics around emerging storytelling technologies. I'm very curious to hear your take, definitely as a creative yourself, but more importantly, as an educator.
Yes, I mean, Ahmed and I have this conversation a lot these days about how do we fund and amplify Black talent in storytelling. And what is perennial and persistent is that the story shapes the technology, or should shape the technology. The story should come first. And Ahmed's experience with the Star Wars franchise, and Lucas in particular, is that the story always comes first. And how do you have the story shape the technology rather than, and Ahmed talks really great about this, is that we kind of do it kind of ass backwards right now. Like we come out with this Vision Pro technology or, you know, a VR technology, and then we're looking and searching, you know, blindly for talent. Whereas actually, maybe we should start with the stories that can shape and build the technology. Yeah. You know, in our AfroRhythms game, we create artifacts, and those artifacts can bring the world that we want to see to life. So why don't we start with the story? What we do best as human beings is to tell stories. And so I think that's really important. And so I think the other weak signal here is that if you fund Black talent, you know, in the States, on the African continent, you're going to enrich the world. You know, if you go to the marginalized peoples and amplify their talent, you're gonna break open and unleash a radical imagination that heals people. And I think that's really important. Yeah. You know, how do we create healing technologies out of our stories?
Story comes first. I love
Yes.
that. I want to leave some time to bring in the audience as well. But as we're talking about the future of storytelling, it's sort of taking me back to my earliest experience of story, which was really on my grandmother's lap, absorbing stories that ended up shaping who I am, how I understand the world, how I move in it. And I'm pretty sure that that's true for a lot of us in this room today, because across cultures, across centuries, women have been very important storytellers in their communities. They have woven the communities together. They have been responsible for passing wisdom. And so I just want to acknowledge that the conversation about the future of storytelling is part of a much bigger conversation that extends beyond the scope of this four-person panel, and it would be incomplete without the perspective of women. So before we go to the audiences, I want to ask one final question to all of you from my side. Tell us about a woman, colleague, mentor, or a leader that you admire from afar, who you think is, really reshaping the storytelling landscape, someone whose work we should all be paying attention to and learning from. And any of you can go first.
Okay, just because it's hot off the press on my mind. So I have actually helped co-organize the Black Speculative Arts Movement. It's a celebration of the Black imagination. And so we have a key figure there, Cherie Renee Thomas out of Tennessee. She's a Black fiction storyteller. But, she also, and I didn't realize this until recently, she discovered going into W.B. Du Bois's archive that he had created a novel in the early 1900s, 1908 to 1910, called The Princess Still novel, where he had created that fictional megascope device to look for the undiscovered stories. And the fact that she created this and is such a talent and force in speculative storytelling, it's kind of telling that I didn't even realize that she had done that, but that she is shaping, and has worked with Janelle Monáe on her stories as well. She's really kind of pushing the envelope of what storytelling can be from the Black woman perspective, and I think it's so powerful to see her. And when you meet her, she has this huge afro. I just love her. It's just like embracing me. It's like meeting the mothership. So I just think she's a force, and to recognize more people like that, more women, Black women in particular, that have shaped me, are so important in my life. My grandmother, folks like that. So that's what moves me, and that's another thing. Having the future feel. Ahmed talks about this all the time too. We have to feel the future. And so women in particular have that empathy, that's why we call it the mothership, right? It's that empathic embrace, I met the woman from Good Times. I don't know, you don't remember Good Times, but it was a great series, comedy series in the US in the 1970s. But I met, Esther Roll, and she gave me this big bear hug, and I was just like, damn, so she was part of my storytelling too, the legacy. And so just to recognize and honor the Black women in my life that do that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lonny.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that because there are so many women in my life as producers, as creative executives who are running our studio and studios. I just wouldn't be able to name all of them. To people that I'm excited about their futures. There's a woman named Tej Kiran Kaur who's my executive assistant, and I always tell her, "You're going to be the next producer," But I'll start with Hollywood Answer, which is I'll go with Greta Gerwig as someone who has really changed the way we look at storytelling and cinema. She started off with an independent film called Lady Bird, which I watched with my daughters, and we were all very, very moved by it. She got that picture made. She moved on to Little Women, took a wonderful adaptation of that. And of course, with Barbie, we were all in the conversation. And people thought she was crazy to take on that picture at first. And she said, "I got this." And she really made it a movement. So I think that's very inspirational. But I also want to talk about a woman I know, Jahan Najin, who is from Egypt, and she is a documentary director. And she did the Academy Award nominated picture, The Square, about the Arab Spring, but when President Mubarak was leaving office and the movement, and she had the courage to go right in the middle of this revolt in the square with the cameras and people getting hit. And she got nominated, as I said, and then she got a lot of docuseries from HBO and other platforms. She's a hero of mine. That's a fantastic, strong voice in cinema. So we've got major motion pictures, we've got nominated documentaries, and I'm also going to say the women in this room, I can feel the energy. They're the next voice as well. They're showing up. We're engaging. We're going to be the difference. So that's, again, thank you for that incredible question.
Thank you, Glenn. Omar, let's hear from you.
So I'm going to cheat as well and mention two people. First, I want to just call out Maythad Awali, who's a young up-and-coming Emirati filmmaker. She also is a TV host at Dubai TV, where I first met her before she decided that she was going to follow her passion to direct a film. She helped to co-write the script. It came out this year. It's called Eid Eidain, which is Eid comes twice, basically. And the thing I just want to remark on is it was the first time that I remember genuinely sitting in the theater. It has an Emirati and Saudi cast, and feeling like the conversations felt very authentic and relatable. It's not a flawless film, I've told her that too, but it's just really fun. And it was just a really nice moment for me to see someone I knew, who I knew had the passion, actually go out and make the thing. And it to be both successful and relevant and somewhat authentic. And yeah, it's a good thing. It's a fun film to watch. I'd recommend watching with your family if you have the chance. So that's sort of on the traditional film side. Something else I want to mention, and this is more, I think, in keeping with the idea of like how we're going to consume content in the future, and the idea that we are following more and more individuals more than companies or brands, is Bisan Auda from, hi, hello, I'm alive. I'm Bisan, I'm alive in Gaza, whose reporting has, I think, just been incredible to see over the past 400 plus days. She's still there. She's still recording videos every single day. She's created, I think, a level of awareness and empathy that any of us can aspire to, and in a very relatable, human way. And I think that type of storytelling in the face of adversity is so important and so specific as to the way that we can tell and share stories today. And something that I think is really powerful in the way that we engage stories. I mean, we kind of talked around it, but I think ultimately the goal of storytelling, in addition to representing your group or your tribe or your identity, is empathy. And I think that she's managed to create that.
Beautifully said. We are over time, but I do want to give an opportunity to all of you, or any of you who wants to ask a question. Probably have time for a couple. Okay, let's go there first, and then on that side.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Ioana, I'm from Romania, and my question would be, most of the stories that surround us are conflict-driven. This is part of the story structure. We are taught in school that conflict is at the heart of the story. I'm wondering, are we able to create stories driven by peace, but just as entertaining as conflict-driven stories? Do you feel we could come up with new genres or new story methodologies to perhaps, combine the best in humanity, but also not lose the entertainment part?
That's a really excellent question, and I'll let the panelists respond, but there are a lot of incredible female futurists, actually, who come from peace studies, and I really encourage you to look into their work, because there's some incredible examples there. Maybe we'll take the second question, and then I'll let you all decide how you want to respond to them. So.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Maha. I'm from Saudi. I think on the cultural perspective, you mentioned producing, up until very recently, we haven't been seeing a lot of movies coming out of the Gulf, besides of what we grew up with in Kuwait, the plays those days, and they were primarily comedy and extreme drama. But I think a lot more realistic, and I think indie films have been coming out of the region recently. And I would say my question is around, how easy or hard is it when trying to come up with movies that have multicultural elements in them to get the right actors, to get the right dialects down? Because especially in Arabic, and I'm sure it's the same thing also in Spanish or other languages as well, to get the dialect correctly, because then the people, it wouldn't matter to people who are reading the subtitles, but I think for people who understand the language, it makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Okay. So narratives of conflict to narratives of peace, and the question about nuance in showcasing reality of our world. So who wants to go first?
I'll take it really quick. when we talk about breaking genres, the one critical thing to know, and this was an old studio boss who told me this a long time ago, I think it was Paramount or Warner Brothers, one of those two studios he ran, and he said that a filmmaker should love all genres. Sometimes you have people say, oh, I only do rom-coms, or I only do horror. But he said, you know what? There are horror elements in rom-coms, because just before the wedding's about to begin, it's horrific. So I think it's critical to mix those genres. You have to understand them, whatever those genres are. And by doing that, you will create another genre. And I'm excited to see that. When it comes to the authenticity of language, you know, when Netflix did put out Narcos, the lead actor was from Brazil, but he's playing Colombian. And it bothered a lot of people in Colombia. But as an American, I didn't pick up that nuance. But I heard about it. And so there's always going to be that conflict of, well, this actor might be better for whatever reason, but the dialect it's not authentic. So clearly, I would recommend working with a dialect coach to try to get that as best as possible. Because I agree, people will feel that, and we're making films for individual experiences, not mass audiences. So be mindful of the individual.
Okay, I'll make this quick. Give you time to. I'll actually take the dialect question first. I think. Look, that's absolutely a challenge. You're very right to point it out. I think it's been the reason behind the lack of success of some shows that have been made here. I won't mention specific names, but there are shows that certainly have not traveled because Arab audiences, or did not, I guess, connect because Arab audiences watch them, and either the dialect was a bit off, or you had multiple people speaking different dialects in a way that felt inorganic, and this is actually the actual case, the script was originally written in English, translated into Arabic, and then the conversation feels false, even if the Arabic is technically correct, right? And that's actually why I mentioned the Aideen specifically, because I was sitting there and I was like, oh, an Arab wrote this. This is an actual conversation a Saudi and Emirati would have. This is the way they would speak naturally, the right slang, the right inflection, the right nuance in language. And that was like the real pleasure of it. But it's very difficult because we don't have, first of all, we don't have that many young writers. And a lot of that's just down to a lack of opportunity and a lack of financial incentive. And that is an ongoing challenge. But that's something that we need to cultivate. And the more that we have successes in that space, the better that we'll get. The more you have people creating content, not just in the film space, but just generally across any platform, the more you'll have people who are comfortable writing, expressing themselves, writing those types of dialects. But that type of authenticity is crucial, whether you're doing it for a local or international audience. Because I think even when you have an international audience, and you mentioned, oh, you didn't pick up on the nuance of Brazilian versus Colombian. I certainly wouldn't have either. But I might have felt like that person sounds a little bit different, or people are reacting to him different. There's just something about the way that someone carries themselves. And that's obviously some fantastic actors, but just generally speaking, if you don't have the authenticity, then I think you lose a little bit in the message. And I think the authenticity is actually what makes it broadly appealing. If it feels like something specific, but something with, say, universal emotional stakes, then that's what travels. That's why you will watch something in Spanish or Korean or Japanese. It's not because you're reading subtitles or not reading subtitles. It's because the core emotional message, the empathy, is something that you connect to. In terms of your question about conflict, I mean, I went to film school, so I was taught, yes, you have to have a conflict. It has to, you have to have an inciting incident within the first 30 pages, or your script is boring. I do think life is built on conflict, but I think that we can look at different types of conflict. They don't always have to be physical violence. It doesn't always have to be conflicts between, religions, faiths, peoples. It can be interpersonal in nature. It can be very small, relatable everyday things, emotions, challenges we all go through, where there's still real stakes. But it doesn't have to be world-ending. It doesn't have to be something that encourages violence or hate. That would be my 2 cents on that, or 2 Phils.
Yep, thank you.
I would say, inventing a new genre might be like pluriverse dramas or genres, right? I mean, there's a great artist named Brown who has this painting called "What's Your Black?" and it looks at Afrofuturists who are looking at different screens and it says, "What's your black? What's your black?" Because the minutia of what Black identity is about is so interesting. Black Brazilian, Black Colombian. There's 30% of Colombia's population that's Black. I'm I'm Native American, Jewish, Black. I'm everything, that's Black. That's Black, So let's talk about that, and let's do it in a comedic fashion, right? Dramas that are conflict-driven but can have comedic elements are so interesting. So that could be so rich. So playverse dramas, What's Your Black, like solar punk. What we need to go from is from the survival economy to the imagination economy, and have that drive us. What are the great stories to be told about the next 300 years that can inspire us, that aren't dystopian, that can have joy? We are not going back. All right.
We're way over time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your insights.